President, Madam Chief Justice, and the entire Kansas Supreme Court, members of my cabinet, leaders of the Kansas tribes, and all the constitutional officers and legislators assembled. It is an honor to speak with you tonight, and I do want to thank you for that very warm welcome. It's also my honor to welcome Lieutenant Governor David Tolman and his family in the gallery, his wife Beth, and their children Caroline and William. Along with my family members, especially my granddaughter Rory, who are joining us tonight via live stream. For much of my time in office, we've been focused on righting the wrongs of the past, getting our state back on the road to prosperity. And that's exactly what we've accomplished together. We funded our public schools 6 years in a row. We balanced the state budget 6 years in a row. We've closed the Bank of KDOT, and we're investing in our roads and our bridges and broadband. We've attracted the largest economic development projects in the history of our state. We've paid down our debt, and we've seen our state's financial ratings be upgraded 3 times. We've completely axed the tax on groceries. As of 2 weeks ago, no Kansan is paying state sales tax on groceries. As you all know, it took a while, but we got it done. And there's more relief on the way. In total, I've signed into law $2 billion in tax cuts. It wasn't easy, but together we made it happen for Kansans. This April, seniors won't pay any state income tax on their Social Security. A higher standard deduction will ensure that Kansans pay less when they file their taxes. And we lowered the tax that everyone hates, the property tax. In an era that might be defined for its divisiveness on the national level, we've shown that here in Kansas, we can still find common ground and get things done. We have accomplished so much, but because of the nature of our challenges, we've often been so focused on what's ever needed immediate fixing: our schools, our infrastructure, our foster care system. And we haven't always spent as much time talking about what lies ahead for Kansas, not just next year or the year after, but in the decades ahead, the Kansas we will leave for our children and our grandchildren. Since I've been in office, we've built an incredibly strong foundation for our state. Kansas has never been in better financial shape. Responsible, steady governance has earned Kansas recognition nationwide for our economic achievements and for our educational system. And now it's time to build on that foundation. We're 2 weeks into 2025, a quarter of the way into the 21st century. So tonight, instead of looking back at last year or ahead through the current year, let's think about the rest of the century and how we prepare for it. As CEO of the state, I'm going to deliver what is essentially a quarterly report. outlining how we've reached key metrics over the past 25 years and what we must accomplish over the next 75 years for Kansas to prosper throughout the rest of the 21st century. When I think back on the year 2000, it's hard to fathom just how much Kansas and the nation and the world in which we live has changed. I wasn't in politics. I was across the street as the executive director of the Kansas Recreation and Park Association. In 2000, except for Representatives Ballard and Helgerson and Senator Haley, none of us was here in this chamber. In 2000, fewer than 5% of rural Americans had internet access. A gallon of gas cost $1.50, and the average price of a dozen eggs was 91 cents. There were no smartphones. Social media was still in its infancy. People actually talked to one another at the dinner table. Our world has changed in colossal ways, probably more than in any other 25-year period. Everything moves so quickly now, maybe a little too quickly. You know, when I talk to Kansans, I hear two things that can be true at once. First, Kansans are excited about the future. They really are. They see the new educational opportunities and the new innovative companies setting up shop here in Kansas. And they can see bright futures for themselves and for their children. But I can also hear in people's voices that they're worried. Worried that the traditions they grew up with, the way of life they cherished so much, could be slipping away. I think we can all relate to that. Nobody really wants a world where we speak more to computers and AI bots than we do to our neighbors. Nobody wants a world where it seems like we're always at each other's throats. And as I think about our state's future, I keep coming back to the same thought. How do we embrace change? How do we embrace opportunity? How do we embrace innovation? But do it in the Kansas way, where we remain true to our Kansas core values, a place where the good life means getting a great education, working hard, and doing right by our children, our grandchildren, and our neighbors. And where our common decency always rises above our differences. As the leaders of our state, we have a responsibility to set this tone, to show Kansans that we too have our eye on the future, that we intend to embrace it in the Kansas way, starting right now. First, let's talk about our very youngest Kansans. Children born today will live to see the 22nd century. How we invest in those children now will determine our state's trajectory for the rest of the century. Research is clear that a child's experiences from birth to age 5 determine the trajectory of his or her entire life, from social emotional development to academic success and to career success. We've done a lot on this front over the past few years. We've aggressively tackled our child care crisis, recognizing that shortages across the state and skyrocketing costs have handicapped our workforce, our businesses, and hurt our children during their most formative years. Because of our investments and our work to lift up child care providers, today more families can access affordable, quality, early childhood education and care than ever before. Even better, we are on track to add more child care capacity in the next 2 years than we have in the last 15. Families are still struggling with the cost of child care, but we are addressing this issue with the urgency it requires. But all of this would be so much easier if we eliminated the red tape that makes it so difficult for so many families to access services and for child care providers to even operate. Right now, early childhood services are siloed in 4 different state agencies. If a family is searching for care for a newborn, that family must navigate among 3 different agencies to figure out which program is the right fit. If a child care center wants to get off the ground, it must work with one state agency to get licensed, another to receive financial aid and workforce support, and a third to get assistance with startup costs. A system overloaded with bureaucracy might be manageable for some parents and for some providers, but it is a nightmare for most families who don't have the time or the resources to plow through the maze of unnecessary paperwork, and they shouldn't have to. Thankfully, there's a solution readily available. Let's put the functions of these agencies under one roof, the Office of Early Childhood. Let's offer a one-stop shop for young families, for child care providers, and for businesses to access early childhood services. Let's do what Missouri, North Dakota, and Arkansas have already done. Now, in Kansas, this concept already enjoys bipartisan support. Over 700 child care providers, business leaders, and families have spoken out in favor of the one-stop shop idea. Last session, it passed the House with 110 votes. Eliminating unnecessary government bureaucracy, cutting red tape, and making it easier for parents and businesses to support our kids isn't a Democratic or Republican idea. It's a common sense idea we all can get behind. So let's get this done. Early childhood is just the first step. If we're going to continue to attract new businesses and young families, we must have strong public schools. It's pretty straightforward. 90% of our students go to our public schools. Along with early childhood education and care, the smartest, most effective investment we can make in our next generation is through our public schools. But even beyond the economic gains, when we talk about protecting the Kansas way of life, our public schools are the heart and soul of so many of our communities. It's where we come together. Prioritizing our public schools means investing in them, protecting them, always fighting to make them better, and never, ever taking taxpayer dollars from our public schools to give to private schools. Doing so weakens our public school system, particularly in our rural communities. And as a state, we just can't afford to do that. So simply put, I will continue to reject any attempt, no matter what it looks like, to reroute public taxpayer dollars to private schools. So now let's go back to the quarterly report. In the last 25 years, high school graduation rates have increased by 11%, and today are at an all-time high. 10 years ago, we were neglecting special education, ignoring state funding requirements, and looking away as special education students didn't get the support they needed and are entitled to. Last year, we invested $75 million into special education, the largest single-year investment in state history, putting our state on track to fully fund special education by the 28-29 school school year. In 2000, only 59% of fourth graders were reading at a basic level. We made modest progress. According to the most recent data, 63% of our students have now reached that level. That is not good enough. In response, last year, Republican and Democratic leaders came together and passed the Blueprint for Literacy. This is an all-hands-on-deck approach to ensure our teachers have the training and the tools they need to bring 90% of our students to the reading benchmark by 2033. The Blueprint for Literacy is an amazing example of what can happen when we think long-term and when we work together. I'd like to recognize the two people who championed the Blueprint for Literacy effort. Former State Senator Molly Baumgartner and Dr. Cynthia Lane, who actually stepped down from her position as a member of the Kansas Board of Regents to direct this new initiative. Unfortunately, Senator Baumgartner was unable to join us tonight. Dr. Cynthia Lane, would you please stand and be recognized? A big job ahead of you, and a lot of people are watching. But because we've come together, because we've funded our public schools, we've gotten ourselves back on track, finally ending decades of litigation and judicial oversight. We should all take pride in this milestone, but we should not take it for granted. And this is where we talk about taxes. We cannot risk our state's financial stability by implementing any semblance of the reckless tax experiment that devastated our schools a dozen years ago. As Kansans know, I'm all for tax cuts. To date, I've already signed over $2 billion in tax cuts. But going forward, I will not support any proposal that robs our schools of the funds they need to teach our children. For instance, there was a proposal to slash the state corporate income tax to zero. That is a non-starter. We've seen that movie before. We know how it ends. We know what happened to our schools, to our roads, and to our reputation. We must stay on the path to prosperity as we move through the rest of the 21st century. And with all that said, let me add a caveat. While I would prefer that we postpone discussions about taxes until next session, we will have a better handle on the full impact of the tax cuts that we passed last year. I will consider proposals to modify our tax structure that pay for themselves and don't threaten our state's long-term financial health. Speaking about long-term health issues, and no, I'm not going to talk about Medicaid expansion. No, not right now. Instead, I want to talk about childhood hunger. Roughly 49% of Kansas kids live in low-income households. We know these kids can't afford to pay for school. That's why my budget this year will provide free school lunches to over 35,000 Kansas students, many of them in our rural areas. Now, Kansas is fortunate. When it comes to eliminating childhood hunger, We have advocates all over the state doing all they can to ensure our kids don't go to bed hungry and that they don't go to school hungry. And let me introduce you to one of them. Connie Bose is the Director of Nutrition Services for USD 480 in Liberal. She is also the President of the Kansas School Nutrition Association. She knows firsthand how difficult it is for children to learn or even to behave when they're hungry. Connie also knows many hardworking families and how they struggle to put food on the table. Currently, 87% of students in USD 480 qualify for reduced or free lunch. That is the highest percentage anywhere in our state. By eliminating this burden, we can reduce childhood hunger, we can reduce the stigma our low-income students face in our school cafeterias, and we can increase academic success. In addition, we can streamline administrative nightmares for our school districts and for professionals like Connie. Connie, thank you for what you do, and could you please, well, you are standing. And make sure that no Kansas child goes hungry. You know, when I imagine the end of this century and the state our youngest Kansans will inherit, I see so many good things on the horizon. But there's one thing that is seriously concerning, and that's our dwindling water supply. Forget making it 75 years down the road. Some parts of western Kansas don't have groundwater enough to last another 25 years. And without that water, the agricultural industry that fuels our economy and sustains our rural way of life cannot survive. And no one knows that better than Joe Ferguson. Joe is a soldier in the Kansas Army National Guard and a senior studying sustainable agriculture at Fort Hays State University. After Joe graduates, he will return to Kensington, Kansas as the fourth generation in his family to work their wheat, corn, and hay fields. Even though he's only 23, Joe is already thinking about succession plans for his farm. What will he leave for that next generation? Will there be anything left for the next generation? Joe's generation of family farmers are depending upon our generation of state leaders to secure that water supply. Farmers like Joe are the backbone of our state. And the tradition of family farming is core to who we are. We owe it to Joe and other young farmers across the state and those who come after to act now before it's too late. Joe, will you please stand and be recognized? Grateful to those of you in the legislature and beyond who have been working with me to change decades of inaction on our water supply. The Kansas Water Authority has gone all over the state, listening to farmers, crop insurers, feedlot owners, and bankers, over 1,500 stakeholders. As a result, we have set a goal. From now on, each generation will work to protect water supply for the next 2 generations. We're calling it the multi-generational promise. It may look different in different areas of the state, but the fundamentals are the same. Stabilize the Ogallala Aquifer, maximize the capacity of our reservoirs, and ensure all Kansans have access to clean, sustainable water. Have to develop a better water management system. Right now, water faces many of the same issues I described with early childhood. It's managed by 14 different agencies, making it difficult, if not impossible, to align efforts around policy, planning, and investment. If this is going to work, that's got to change. So let's create an Office of Natural Resources. Let's streamline our systems to make our work so much more effective and so much more efficient. Second, to deliver on that multi-generational promise, we need to invest more resources. Last year, the legislature came together and provided $35 million additional dollars every year for the next 5 years. In my budget tomorrow, I will propose another $30 million above what the legislature added, bringing our overall water investment dollars to $90 million every single year. In addition to enhanced resources, it is imperative that we develop a comprehensive, long-term, and sustainable strategy to ensure that Kansans have the water supply they need to exist, much less to thrive for generations to come. Over 3.5 decades ago, the Kansas legislature understood that to create a transportation system that would effectively serve our citizens, support commerce, and ensure public safety, we needed to have a strategic plan that included a dedicated funding source. And thus, the legislature created the first of now 4 comprehensive transportation plans. That innovative, visionary thinking is exactly what Kansas needs now to ensure that people like Joe, his children, his grandchildren, have the water needed to farm the land, preserve their communities, and their way of life. No doubt, this is a tough task, perhaps even more challenging than the one faced by the legislative task force that overhauled our transportation plan in 2018. But it is one to which my office and so many of you are deeply committed. We have already invested substantial resources in time, money, and political capital. We stand ready to support the legislature's efforts in any way we can to solve our state's most pressing problem. If I'm presenting the Kansas Quarterly Report, I think it's fair to say that the first quarter brought us our share of challenges. In the last 25 years, Kansas has endured 2 historic recessions, a devastating tax experiment, a once-in-a-century pandemic, and then global inflation. At times, we were dangerously close to collapse. Given all that, it's amazing how we brought our state back from the brink. Since I've come into office, we have brought in over $20 billion in new business investment to every corner of the state, created and retained more than 70,000 jobs, created the largest budget surplus and the largest rainy day fund Kansas has ever seen, and did it all while cutting taxes for our veterans, for seniors, for homeowners, for businesses, and for our farmers and ranchers. Long gone are the days of Kansas making the headlines for failure in mismanagement. Now we're attracting companies bringing in $4 billion and 4,000 jobs to DeSoto, nearly $2 billion and 2,000 jobs to Wichita, and over $1 billion and 1,000 jobs to Dodge City. We're winning award after award for economic development. Just stop by David Tolan's office. There's barely space for all the trophies. Now, along these lines, I would like to introduce you to the Seagraves family. 2 years ago, Mike Seagraves, his wife Cassie, and their 2 children, Landon and Lane, moved to Independence, Kansas, from North Carolina. Since then, they welcomed their 3rd child, Lee, who was born in 2023 and thus is a true Kansas native. Mike is the Associate Vice President of Soy Processing for Bartlett Grain in Cherryville. While Cassie works as a therapist providing providing much-needed mental health services for people in our community. Their two older children are enrolled in public school at USD 446 in Independence, and their youngest just started daycare. Mike and Cassie have even formed a Little League baseball team so Landon can continue to play his favorite sport. They've been warmly welcomed by the community, and they are making significant contributions through Mike's work at Bartlett Green and Cassie's work in mental health. Over the course of my administration, we have created a modern economy that's attracting cutting-edge companies and families like the Seagraves. If the Seagraves family could please stand and be recognized. When you're able to recruit from Tar Heel and Blue Devil country to Jayhawk and Wildcat country, I can't tell you how satisfying that is. When it comes to making Kansas a place more families want to call home, trust that I will continue to be laser focused. We must keep supporting our homegrown businesses while working toward around the clock to bring new innovative companies to Kansas. They're not just job creators, they're career creators. And these careers are not just for people with four-year degrees. I want a future where our economy is fueled by people in every corner of the state, where there are educational opportunities, be it an apprenticeship, an internship, a certificate, or a 2- or 4-year degree. No matter where you're from or where you live, our cities, our suburbs, our rural communities, you need a career for which you are prepared, on which you can support a family, and for which you are passionate. Let's agree right here, right now, that Kansas must continue to aggressively pursue innovative business opportunities, both domestic and overseas. Opportunities. There's another idea. Here it comes. Medicaid expansion. Now, I proposed this the last 6 years, and I am proposing it again this year. Let's be honest, the only reason we haven't expanded Medicaid is partisan politics. Over the past 6 years, all the horror myths around Medicaid expansion have been debunked, and all of our states surrounding us have expanded. The one myth that continues to linger here in Kansas is that expansion is too expensive. That is patently false. In fact, it actually costs us money not to expand Medicaid. In 2022, the cost to Kansas taxpayers was $68.5 million. In 23, $71.5 million. In 24, $61.8 million. And if we don't expand Medicaid this year, 2025, it will cost Kansas taxpayers another $78.3 million. In total, we've wasted over $280 million Kansas taxpayer dollars holding on to an ideological falsehood. Imagine the property tax relief we could have given to Kansans. And that doesn't count the $7.6 billion in Kansas taxpayer dollars that have been left on the table in Washington, D.C. Imagine any CEO of any business rejecting nearly $700 million every year just to score political points. It just wouldn't happen in the real world. If we could strip away partisan politics and just look at the numbers, we will expand Medicaid this year. I'm going to end on this tonight. So often, it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day tumble around here. How do you score points on him? How do you outmaneuver her? It's easy to forget that we aren't playing some kind of game here. We have real power. The decisions we make in this building touch every aspect of the lives of the people we work for. And here's the truth. The Kansas our grandkids will inherit is up to us right now. Is our agricultural economy booming because we preserved our water for farmers like Joe? Or is rural Kansas dried up and deserted? That's up to us. Are we turning out the best and brightest workers because we've made it a priority to ensure Kansas has superior public schools? That's up to us. Is Kansas going to be an economic powerhouse in the center of our country, where young families like the Seagraves move to build a life? That's up to us. Will Kansas be a place where we hold on to the small town traditions we cherish, while also embracing the future with a sense of optimism and energy? That's up to us. And it only happens if we put partisanship aside and put Kansas and Kansans first. The only way we'll move forward on any of the challenges facing us is we recognize that both parties have brought good, common sense ideas to the table. And both parties have also brought some pretty wacky ideas to the table. Our job is to lift up the common sense, smart, reasonable ideas that will help Kansas, and then meet in the middle to get it done. I'm not asking you not to love your political party. I'm just asking you to love your state a little more. That's the only way we build that future we all want for Kansas. At Aspera, thank you.